The Supreme Court has just delivered a decision that's shaking the nation and changing the course of American law. In a move that aligns with former President Donald Trump's long-standing defense of the Second Amendment, the court's emergency ruling has struck down major gun bans and redefined what the right to bear arms truly means in modern America. Across the country, lawmakers, citizens, and legal experts are reacting with disbelief as the balance between freedom and control shifts overnight. For millions of gun owners, this moment feels like justice long overdue. But for others, it's a ruling that could alter the safety and politics of the nation for decades to come. This is not just another legal story. It's a turning point that will be remembered as one of the most controversial and defining moments in Supreme Court history. The Supreme Court's emergency ruling came faster than anyone expected. Legal experts predicted months of deliberation, yet the court moved with unprecedented speed. In an 8-1 decision, the justices sided with arguments that the Second Amendment's protection of the right to bear arms must be interpreted literally, not through the political lens of modern gun control. Overnight, a decision that many saw as impossible became a reality. The court essentially said that the Constitution means what it says. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and that no state or federal law can contradict that principle without extraordinary justification. The response was immediate. In cities across the country, gun owners celebrated, waving flags and holding signs declaring victory for freedom. In contrast, gun control advocates were left stunned, calling emergency press conferences to condemn the ruling as reckless and dangerous. Governors of states with strict firearm bans scrambled to consult attorneys, wondering whether their laws could survive the sweeping decision. Legal scholars began dissecting every line of the majority opinion, searching for the limits of what the court had just unleashed. It became clear that this ruling wasn't only about firearms. It was about power. It was about whether the government could restrict a constitutional right based on policy concerns or whether that right stood absolute, beyond the reach of political trends. Behind the scenes, the court's reasoning drew heavily on the concept of constitutional originalism, the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted as it was understood at the time it was written. For years, this philosophy has been at the heart of Trump's judicial appointments. During his presidency, he filled the federal bench with judges who viewed the Constitution through a historical lens, resisting the idea that rights evolve with society. Now, that legacy has come full circle. The Supreme Court, reshaped by those appointments, delivered a decision that mirrored Trump's rhetoric about freedom, government overreach, and the sanctity of individual rights. For his supporters, it was the ultimate vindication, proof that the long fight to protect the Second Amendment had not been in vain. The case at the center of this storm originated from a coalition of states that enacted sweeping bans on certain firearms, magazine capacities, and accessories under the banner of public safety. These states argued that restricting access to specific types of weapons would reduce mass shootings and violent crime. But gun rights advocates countered that such bans punished law-abiding citizens while doing little to stop criminals. The Supreme Court agreed with the latter, declaring that rights cannot be sacrificed in the name of speculative safety. The opinion emphasized that the Second Amendment protects ownership of weapons in common use for lawful purposes, and any restriction that deprives citizens of those arms strikes at the core of constitutional liberty. Within hours, legal experts predicted a wave of challenges to state laws from coast to coast. In states like New York, Illinois, and California, decades of strict gun regulations suddenly seemed vulnerable. Legislators faced the grim reality that entire sections of their legal codes might now be unconstitutional. Gun owners who had faced prosecution for banned weapons began filing appeals. Prosecutors paused ongoing cases, uncertain whether convictions could hold up under the new precedent. Federal agencies tasked with regulating firearms, like the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, braced for legal chaos as courts across the nation began interpreting the Supreme Court's language in real time. Politically, the fallout was immense. Supporters of Trump celebrated the ruling as one of the most significant victories for individual liberty in modern history. They framed it as the culmination of years of work to restore America's founding principles. Social media platforms were flooded with clips of Trump's past speeches about gun rights, now seen as prophetic. Commentators declared that this ruling marked the ultimate realization of his judicial agenda. Meanwhile, critics warned that the court had gone too far, accusing it of creating a constitutional crisis. They argued that the ruling would make it nearly impossible for states to protect their citizens from gun violence, and that the court had elevated ideology above public safety. Yet the broader reality was more complex. The ruling didn't simply erase every gun law in the country. It redrew the lines of what the government could and couldn't do. For instance, background checks and restrictions for convicted felons or domestic abusers were likely to remain intact. However, blanket bans on specific types of rifles, handguns, or accessories were now constitutionally suspect. The majority opinion stated that the right to self-defense extends to all law-abiding citizens and encompasses the tools commonly used for that purpose. This reasoning fundamentally altered how lower courts would evaluate gun laws moving forward. The political ramifications extended beyond legal interpretation. The ruling reignited a fierce national debate over federalism, the balance of power between state and federal governments. Governors who had long prided themselves on enacting tough gun laws found their authority curtailed by a higher constitutional standard. Some vowed to resist, pledging to pass new versions of their laws designed to survive judicial scrutiny. Others warned of defiance, suggesting that their states might ignore aspects of the ruling altogether. Legal experts cautioned that open defiance of a Supreme Court decision would invite constitutional conflict unseen since the civil rights era. For many Americans watching the drama unfold, it felt like history repeating itself, another moment when the meaning of freedom was being tested before the eyes of the world. For gun owners, the decision represented more than a legal victory. It was a statement of identity. Many saw it as the reaffirmation of their place in America's founding story, a recognition that the right to bear arms was not a privilege granted by government, but a birthright protected from it. Gun shops reported surging demand for rifles and handguns as citizens rushed to exercise their newly confirmed rights. Online forums filled with celebrations, discussions about the implications of the ruling, and plans for advocacy to ensure the decision would not be undermined by future legislation. In contrast, communities affected by gun violence voiced fear and frustration. Survivors and activists gathered outside courthouses holding photos of loved ones lost to shootings, demanding that lawmakers find new ways to protect public safety without violating constitutional rights. They argued that the ruling, while rooted in constitutional theory, failed to address the lived reality of violence in America. Mental health advocates and law enforcement officers shared concerns about increased risks if restrictions were lifted too quickly. The emotional divide between those celebrating and those mourning grew deeper, turning social media and television debates into emotional battlegrounds. Amid the uproar, one undeniable truth emerged. The Supreme Court's ruling had redefined the boundaries of constitutional interpretation. It signaled that America was entering a new era, one in which courts would be far less tolerant of laws that placed collective safety above individual rights. For legal scholars, it was a reaffirmation of the court's shift toward textualism, where the words of the Constitution are treated as fixed and absolute. For politicians, it was a wake-up call that judicial appointments carry consequences far beyond any single presidency. And for citizens, it was a reminder that the meaning of freedom is constantly being negotiated between liberty and responsibility. In the weeks that followed, new lawsuits flooded federal courts. Cities that once prided themselves on strict firearm regulations faced challenges that threatened to unravel years of policy. State legislatures convened emergency sessions to revise gun laws, seeking to comply with the ruling while preserving some measure of control. The conversation expanded beyond guns to broader questions about the limits of government authority. Could similar logic be applied to other constitutional rights, speech, privacy, religion, in ways that reduce government power? The answer, many experts said, was yes. The Supreme Court had sent a clear signal. The Constitution must be interpreted according to its plain meaning, even when the results are politically inconvenient. Donald Trump's supporters hailed the ruling as proof that his influence on the judiciary would shape America for generations. They argued that the decision demonstrated how deeply his appointments had changed the court, ensuring that the principles of limited government and individual liberty would outlive his presidency. Political analysts predicted that the decision would energize conservative voters in the upcoming election, framing it as a victory for freedom and a warning against future administrations that might try to undo it. As the dust settled, America found itself standing at a crossroads. Supporters of the ruling spoke of a restored republic, one faithful to the founders' intent. Critics feared a future of greater violence and uncertainty. Yet both sides agreed on one thing. The Supreme Court's decision had changed everything. It had reminded the nation that the Constitution is not a living document that bends with every political breeze, but a framework that demands respect even when it challenges comfort. In the final analysis, this decision was not just about guns. It was about who defines freedom in America. It was about whether rights are gifts from the government or guarantees that exist beyond its reach. And as the debate continues to echo through the courts, Congress, and the streets, one truth remains undeniable. The Supreme Court has drawn a line in history, and the nation must now decide on which side of that line it stands that haunt ever before.